Arrived at Bologna, he first approached the footmen, and was taken to the palace of the 16 by a bishop sent by Cardinal Soderini, who was sick. He knelt before the Pope, who looked wrathfully at him, and said, as if in anger, "Instead of coming to us, you have waited for us to come and find you," inferring that Bologna is nearer Florence than Rome. Michelangelo spread his hands and humbly asked for pardon in a loud voice, saying he had acted in anger through being driven away, and that he hoped for forgiveness for his error. The bishop who presented him made excuses, saying that such men are ignorant of everything except their art. At this the Pope waxed wroth, and striking the bishop with a mace he was holding, said, "It is you who are ignorant to reproach him when we say nothing." The bishop therefore was hustled out by the attendants, and the Pope's anger being appeased, he blessed Michelangelo, who was loaded with gifts and promises, and ordered to prepare a bronze statue of the Pope, 5 braccia high, in a standing attitude of majesty, habited in rich vestments, and with determination and courage displayed in his countenance. This was placed in a niche above the St. Petronio gate. It is said that while Michelangelo was engaged upon it, Francia the painter came to see it, having heard much of him and his works, but seen none. He obtained the permission, and was amazed at Michelangelo's art. When asked what he thought of the figure, he replied that it was a fine cast and good material. Michelangelo, thinking that he had praised the bronze rather than the art, said, "I am under the same obligation to Pope Julius, who gave it to me, as you are to those who provide your paints." And in the presence of the nobles he angrily called him a blockhead. Meeting one day a son of Francia, who was said to be a very handsome youth, he said, "Your father knows how to make living figures better than to paint them." One of the nobles asked him which was the larger, the Pope's statue or a pair of oxen, and he replied, "It depends upon the oxen. Those of Bologna are certainly larger than our Florentine ones." Michelangelo finished the statue in clay before the Pope left for Rome. His Holiness went to see it, and the question was raised of what to put in the left hand, the right being held up with such a proud gesture that the Pope asked if it was giving a blessing or a curse. Michelangelo answered that he had admonishing that he was admonishing the people of Bologna to be prudent. When he asked the Pope whether he should put a book in his left hand, the pontiff replied, "Give me a sword. I am not a man of letters." The Pope left 1,000 crowns wherewith to finish it in the bank of Monsieur Antamaria da Legnano. After 16 months of hard work, it was placed in front of the church of St. Petronio, as already related. It was destroyed by the Bentivogli, and the bronze sold to Duke Alfonso of Ferrara, who made a cannon of it called the Julius, the head only being preserved, which is now in his wardrobe. After the Pope had returned to Rome, and when Michelangelo had finished the statue, Buonarotti, the friend and relation of Raphael, and therefore ill-disposed to Michelangelo, seeing the Pope's preference for sculpture, schemed to divert his attention, and told the Pope that it would be a bad omen to get Michelangelo to go on with his tomb, as it would seem to be an invitation to death. He persuaded the Pope to get Michelangelo on his return to paint the vaulting of the Sixtine Chapel. In this way Bramante and his other rivals hoped to confound him, for by taking him from sculpture, in which he was perfect, and putting him to colouring in fresco, in which he had no experience, they thought he would produce less admirable work than Raphael, and even if he succeeded, he would become embroiled with the Pope, from whom they wished to separate him. Thus, when Michelangelo returned to Rome, the Pope was disposed not to have the tomb finished for the time being, and asked him to paint the vaulting of the chapel. Michelangelo tried every means to avoid it, and recommended Raphael, for he saw the difficulty of the work, knew his lack of skill in colouring, and wanted to finish the tomb. But the more he excused himself, the more the impetuous Pope was determined he should do it, being stimulated by the artist's rivals, especially Bramante, and ready to become incensed against Michelangelo. At length, seeing that the Pope was resolute, Michelangelo decided to do it. Footnote: he was engaged upon this work from 1508 to 1512. End of footnote. The Pope commanded Bramante to make preparations for the painting, and he hung a scaffold on ropes, making holes in the vaulting. When Michelangelo asked why he had done this, as on the completion of the painting it would be necessary to fill up the holes again, Bramante declared there was no other way. Michelangelo thus recognized either that Bramante was incapable or else hostile, and he went to complain to the Pope that the scaffolding would not do, and that Bramante did not know how it should be constructed. The Pope answered in Bramante's presence that Michelangelo should design one for himself. Accordingly, he erected one on poles not touching the wall, a method which guided Bramante and others in similar work. He gave so much rope to the poor carpenter who made it that it sufficed, when sold, for the dower of the man's daughter to whom Michelangelo presented it. He then set to work on the cartoons. The Pope wanted to destroy the work on the walls done by masters in the time of Sixtus, and he set aside 15,000 ducats as the cost as vaulted by Giuliano da San Gallo. Impressed by the greatness of the work, Michelangelo sent to Florence for help, resolving to prove himself superior to those who had worked there before, and to show modern artists the true way to design the paint. The circumstances spurred him on in his quest of fame and his desire for the good of art. When he had completed the cartoons, he waited before beginning to color them in fresco until some friends of his who were painters should arrive from Florence, as he hoped to obtain help from them and learn their methods of fresco painting, in which some of them were experienced, namely Granaccio, Giulian Bugiardini, Jacopo di Sandro, Indeco the elder, Agnolo di Donino, and Aristotle. He made them begin some things as a specimen, but perceiving their work to be very far from his expectations, he decided one morning to destroy everything which they had done, and shutting himself up in the chapel, he refused to admit them, and would not let them see him in his house. This jest seemed to them to be carried too far, and so they took their departure, returning with shame and mortification to Florence. Michelangelo then made arrangements to do the whole work single-handed. His care and labor brought everything into excellent train, and he would see no one in order to avoid occasions for showing anything, so that the most lively curiosity was excited. Pope Julius was very anxious to see his plans, and the fact of their being hidden greatly excited his desire. But when he went one day, he was not admitted. This led to the disturbance already referred to, when Michelangelo had to leave Rome. Michelangelo has himself told me that when he had painted a third of the vault, a certain moldiness began to appear one winter when the north wind was blowing. This was because the Roman lime, being white and made of travertine, does not dry quickly enough, and when mixed with pozzolana, which is of a tawny color, it makes a dark mixture. If this mixture is liquid and watery, and the wall thoroughly wetted, it often effloresces in drying. This happened here, where the salt effloresced in many places, although in time the air consumed it. In despair at this, Michelangelo wished to abandon the work, and when he excused himself, telling the Pope that he was not succeeding, Julius sent Giuliano da Sangallo, who explained the difficulty and taught him how to obviate it. When he had finished half, the Pope, who sometimes went to see it by means of steps and scaffolds, wanted it to be thrown open, being an impatient man and able to wait until it had received the finishing touches. Immediately all Rome flocked to see it, the Pope being the first arriving before the dust of the scaffolding had been removed. Raphael, who was excellent in imitating at once, changed his style after seeing it, and to show his skill, did the prophets and sibyls in lapis, while Buonarotti tried to have the other half of the chapel given to Raphael. On hearing this, Michelangelo became incensed again against Buonarotti, and pointed out to the Pope, without mincing matters, many faults in his life and works, the latter of which he afterwards corrected in the building of St. Pietro, that being St. Peter's. But the Pope daily became more convinced of Michelangelo's genius, and wished him to complete the work, judging that he would do the other half even better. Thus, single-handed, he completed the work in 20 months, aided only by his mixer of colors. He sometimes complained that, owing to the impatience of the Pope, he had not been able to finish it as he would have desired, as the Pope was always asking him when he would be done. On one occasion, Michelangelo replied that he would be finished when he had satisfied his own artistic sense. And he required you to satisfy us by getting it done quickly, replied the Pope, adding that it was not done soon. He would have the scaffolding down, fearing the Pope's impetuosity. Again, and we require you to satisfy us in getting it done quickly, replied the Pope, adding that if it was not done soon, he would have the scaffolding down, fearing the Pope's impetuosity. Michelangelo finished what he had to do without devoting enough time to it, and the scaffold being removed, it was opened on All Saints' Day, when the Pope went there to sing Mass amid the enthusiasm of the whole city. Incidentally, one of the previous sentences here, right after, the sentence describing the scaffolding, before the scaffolding was pulled down, right, before they're viewing it, it simply says, fearing the Pope's impetuosity. That's one sentence contained. I think there was meant to be a comma here, saying, fearing the Pope's impetuosity, comma, Michelangelo finished what he had to do without devoting enough time to it. You understand? But it is not. In this text, it's fearing the Pope's impetuosity, period. So, again, I would read with that in mind. And we require you to satisfy us in getting it done quickly, replied the Pope, adding that if it was not done soon, he would have the scaffolding down. Period. Fearing the Pope's impetuosity, period. Right? Should be comma. Michelangelo finished what he had to do without devoting enough time to it, and the scaffold being removed, it was opened on All Saints' Day when the Pope went there to sing Mass amid the enthusiasm of the whole city. Like the old masters who had worked below, Michelangelo wanted to retouch some things a secco, such as the backgrounds, draperies, the gold ornaments, and things, to impart greater richness and a better appearance. When the Pope learned this, he wished it to be done, for he had heard what he had seen so highly praised, but as it would have taken too long to reconstruct the scaffold, it remained as it was. The Pope often saw Michelangelo and said, "Have the chapel enriched with colors and gold, in which it is poor." He would answer familiarly. "Holy Father, in those days they did not wear gold. They never became very rich, but were holy men who despised wealth." Altogether, Michelangelo received 3,000 crowns from the Pope for his work, and he must have spent 25 on the colors. The work was executed in great discomfort, as Michelangelo had to stand with his head thrown back, and he so injured his eyesight that for several months he could only read and look at designs in that posture. I suffered similarly when doing the vaulting of 4 large rooms in the palace of Duke Cosimo, and I should never have finished them had I not made a seat supporting the head, which enabled me to work lying down, but it so enfeebled my head and injured my sight that I feel the effects still, and I marvel that Michelangelo supported the discomfort. However, he became more eager every day to be doing and making progress, and so he felt no fatigue and despised the discomfort. The work had 6 corbels on each side, and one at each end containing sibyls and prophets, 6 braccia high, with the creation of the world in the middle, down to the flood and Noah's drunkenness, and the generations of Jesus Christ in the linnets. He used no perspective or foreshortening, or any fixed point of view, devoting his energies rather to adapting the figures to the disposition than the disposition to the figures, contenting himself with the perfection of his nude and draped figures, which are of unsurpassed design and excellence. This work has been a veritable beacon to our art, illuminating all painting and the world which had remained in darkness for so many centuries. Indeed, painters no longer care about novelties, inventions, attitudes, and draperies, methods of new expression, or striking subjects painted in different ways, because this work contains every perfection that can be given. And men are stupefied by the excellence of the figures, the perfection of the foreshortening, the stupendous rotundity of the contours, the grace and slenderness, and the charming proportions of the fine nudes, showing every perfection, every age, expression and form being represented in varied attitudes, such as sitting, turning, holding festoons of oak leaves and laurel, the device of Pope Julius showing that his was a golden age, for Italy had yet to experience her miseries. Some in the middle hold medals with scenes painted like bronze or gold, the subject being taken from the Book of Kings. To show the greatness of God and the perfection of art, he represents the dividing of light from darkness, showing with love and art the Almighty, self-supported with extended arms, with fine discretion and ingenuity. He then did God making the sun and moon, supported by numerous cherubs, with marvellous foreshortening of the arms and legs. The same scene contains the blessing of the earth and the creation, God being foreshortened in the act of flying, the figure following you to whatever part of the chapel you turn. In another part, he did God dividing the waters from the land, marvelous figures showing the highest intellect and worthy of being made by the divine hand of Michelangelo. He continued with the creation of Adam, God being borne by a group of little angels who seem also to be supporting the whole weight of the world. The venerable majesty of God with emotion as he surrounds some of the cherubs with one arm and stretches the other to an atom of marvelous beauty of attitude and outline, seem a new creation of the Maker, rather than one of the brush and design of such a man. He next did the creation of our mother Eve, showing two nudes, one in a heavy sleep like death, the other quickened by the blessing of God. The brush of the great artist has clearly marked the difference between sleeping and waking, and the firmness presented by the divine majesty, to speak humanly. He then did Adam eating the apple, persuaded by a figure half woman and half serpent, and he and Eve expelled from paradise, the angel executing the order of the incensed deity with grandeur and nobility. Adam showing at once grief for his sin and the fear of death, while the woman displays shame timidly and a desire to obtain pardon, as she clasps her arms and hands over her breast, showing, in turning her head towards the angel, that she has more fear of the justice than hope of the divine mercy. No less beautiful is the sacrifice of Cain and Abel, one bringing wood, one bending over the fire, and some killing the victim, certainly not executed with less thought and care than the others. He employed a like art and judgment in the story of the flood, containing various forms of death, the terrified men trying every possible means to save their lives. Their heads show that they recognize the danger with their terror and utter despair. Some are humanely assisting each other to climb to the top of the rock. One of them is trying to remove a half-dead man in a very natural manner. It is impossible to describe the excellent treatment of Noah's drunkenness, showing incomparable and unsurpassable art. Encouraged by these, he attacked the 5 Sibyls and 7 prophets, showing himself even greater. They are of 5 brachia and more, in varied attitudes, beautiful draperies, and displaying miraculous judgment and invention, their expressions seeming divine to the discerning eye. Jeremiah, with crossed legs, holds his bread with his elbow on his knee, holds his beard with his elbow on his knee, the other hand resting in his lap, and his head being bent in a melancholy and thoughtful manner, expressive of his grief, regrets, reflection, and the bitterness he feels concerning his people. 2 boys behind him show similar power, and in the first Sibyl nearer the door, in representing old age, in addition to the involved folds of her draperies, he wishes to show that her blood is frozen by time, and in reading she holds the book close to her eyes, her sight having failed. Next comes Ezekiel, an old man with fine grace and movement, in copious draperies, one hand holding a scroll of his prophecies, the other raised, and his head turned as if he wished to declare things high and great. Behind him are two boys holding his books. Next comes a Sibyl, who, unlike the Erythraean Sibyl just mentioned, holds her book at a distance, and is about to turn the page. Her legs are crossed, and she is reflecting what she shall write, while a boy behind her is lighting her lamp. This figure has an expression of extraordinary beauty. The hair and draperies are equally fine, and her arms are bare, and as perfect as the other parts. He did next the Joel, earnestly reading the scroll, with the most natural expression of satisfaction at what he finds written, exactly like one who has devoted close attention to some subject. Over the door of the chapel Michelangelo placed the aged Zachariah, who is searching for something in a book, with one leg raised and the other down, though in his eager search he does not feel the discomfort. He is a fine figure of old age, somewhat stout in person, his fine drapery falling in new folds. There is another Sibyl turned towards the altar, showing writings, not less admirable, with her boys, than the others. But the nature herself, one must see the Isaiah. But for nature herself, one must see the Isaiah. A figure wrapped in thought, with his legs crossed, one hand on his book to keep the place, and the elbow of the other arm also on the volume, and his chin in his hand, being called by one of the boys behind. He rapidly turns his head without moving the rest of his body. This figure, when well studied, is a liberal education in all the principles of painting. Next him is a beautiful aged Sibyl, who sits studying a book with extraordinary grace, matched by the two boys beside her. It would not be possible to add to the excellence of the youthful Daniel, who is writing in a large book, copying with incredible eagerness from some writings, while a boy standing between his legs supports the weight as he writes. Equally beautiful is the Libica, who, having written a large volume drawn from several books, remains in a feminine attitude, ready to rise and shut the book, a difficult thing practically impossible for any other master. What can I say of the four scenes in the Angels of the Corbels of the Vaulting? David stands with his boyish strength triumphant over a giant, gripping him by the neck, while soldiers about the camp marvel. Very wonderful are the attitudes in the story of Judith, in which we see the headless trunk of Holofernes, while Judith puts the head into a basket carried by her old attendant, who, being tall, bends down to permit Judith to do it, while she prepares to cover it, and turning towards the trunk, shows her fear of the camp and of the body, a well-thought-out painting. Finer than this, and than all the rest, is the story of the brazen serpent over the left corner of the altar, showing the death of many, the biting of the serpents, and Moses raising the brazen serpent on a staff, with a variety in the manner of death, and in those who, being bitten, have lost all hope. The keen poison causes the agony and death of many, who lie still, with twisted legs and arms, while many fine heads are crying out in despair. Not less beautiful are those regarding the serpent, who feel the pains diminishing with returning life. Among them is a woman, supported by one whose aid is as finely shown as her need in her fear and distress. The scene of Ahasuerus in bed having the annals read to him is very fine. There are three figures eating at a table, showing the consul held to liberate the Hebrews and impale Haman, a wonderfully foreshortened figure, the stake supporting him, and an arm stretched out, seeming real and not painted, as do his projecting legs and the parts of the body turned inward. It would take too long to enumerate all the beauties and various circumstances in the genealogy of the patriarchs, beginning with the sons of Noah, forming the generation of Christ, containing a great variety of draperies, expressions, extraordinary and novel fancies. Nothing, in fact, but displays genius, all the figures being finely foreshortened, and everything being admirable and divine. But who can see without wonder the amazement, the tremendous Jonah, the last figure of the chapel, for the vaulting which curves forward from the wall is made by a triumph of art to appear straight through the posture of the figure, which, by the mastery of the drawing and the light and shade, appears really to be bending backwards. O happy age! O blessed artist, who have been able to refresh your darkened eyes at the font of such clearness, and see difficulties made plain by this marvelous artist. His labors have removed the bandage from your eyes, and he has separated the true from the false, which clouded the mind. Thank heaven, then, and try to imitate Michelangelo in all things. When the work was uncovered, everyone rushed to see it from every part, and remained dumbfounded. The Pope, being thus encouraged to greater designs, richly rewarded Michelangelo, who sometimes said in speaking of the great favors showered upon him by the Pope, that he fully recognized his powers, and if he sometimes used hard words, he healed them by signal gifts and favors. Thus, when Michelangelo once asked leave to go and spend the feast of St. John in Florence, and requested money for this, the Pope said, "When will this chapel be ready?" "When I can get it done, Holy Father." The Pope struck him with his mace, repeating, when I can, I will make you finish it." Michelangelo, however, returned to his house to prepare for his journey to Florence, when the Pope sent Curcio, his chamberlain, with 500 crowns to appease him and excuse the Pope, who feared what Michelangelo might do. As Michelangelo knew the Pope, and was really devoted to him, he laughed, especially as such things always turned to this advantage, and the Pope did everything to retain his good will. On the completion of the chapel, the Pope directed Cardinal Santiquattro and the Cardinal of Agen, his nephew, to have his tomb finished on a smaller scale than at first proposed. Michelangelo readily began it anew, hoping to complete it without the hindrance which afterwards caused him so much pain and trouble.